Hello, and it's time for this week's urban horror short story from Makanori, where I'll be reading once again from my second collection of short horror stories, Darkly Sinister. And this story is a lot longer than I suppose a traditional short story, and it's designed to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable and make you think what happens with your money, as in your cash. And this is called One Good Turn. Luke hunkered down in the doorway, pulling his knees up to his chest and wrapping his quilted arms around them. His blankets flapped in the biting wind, still not dry from the previous night's storm. He glanced at the plastic sheeting he used to shelter himself, and then at his upturned cap, prone on the cracked slabs in front of him. Eating and shelter would be a choice for him tonight. He couldn't do both. Luke sniffed and wiped the back of his hand across his runny nose and coughed, a deep, phlegmy cough, remembering to cover his mouth as his mother had taught him. He disgorged the phlegm as the health worker had suggested and wiped his hand against the muddied leg of his threadbare jeans. Antibiotics clearly had a useful life, just like he once did. He snorted as old memories and stretched his fingers out to stop his hands seizing up with the cold. He looked at his dirt-edged nails, bitten to the quick, and the cracked and bloodied stubs that were left. Some habits couldn't be beaten out of you. His chapped knuckles contrasted starkly with his pallid, yet dirt-ingrained hands, and he flexed them a few times before balling them again and burying them against his partially quilted body, another choice he would need to make before much longer. A deep rumbling interrupted his thoughts, and he glanced up at the sky to see the sun sinking behind the endless buildings. Luke's stomach always told him when the day was drawing in. He glanced at his cap again and sighed. It had been 2 days since he'd quelled the rumbling. He'd hoped that tonight. He cast his gaze to the plastic sheeting and sighed again. Damn weather. He would have to move on soon to go find shelter for the night. They didn't like him sleeping in the doorway, and if he waited too long, all the best places would be gone, as they had been the last few nights. Luke took a deep breath, inhaling the appetizing aroma of the nearby street vendor. His stomach expressed an interest. I can't, Luke muttered to himself. Need to fix the sheeting. He pulled the plastic towards him and inspected the tears the storm had made the previous night and prayed Mr. Doyle would spare him something to fix them. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the blocked-off door, his threadbare beanie taking the brunt of the harsh chipboard. Here you go, buddy. Get something warm inside you. A voice sounded, making Luke jump. He opened his eyes and looked at the outstretched hand in front of him, a hand clutching one of those crisp, new £10 notes. Luke shifted his gaze to the owner of the proffered gift, taking in the sharp suits beneath the heavy wool coat, the smile on the strained features, and the twinkle in the grey eyes. Here, the man urged. It's going to be cold tonight. He offered the money again, and this time Luke reached out his hand and took the note, balling it into his fist as if worried it might blow away. Thank you, sir, very much. That's quite all right, the man said, and smiled again before disappearing into the throng of blind commuters heading back to their warm, cosy homes, one of which used to be his. What's it going to be tonight, my lovely? Jono said, and winked at the woman in front of him, his insides tensing as he did so. The woman, overweight and oily-skinned, giggled and batted her lashes at Jono before looking up at him coyly. The usual, she breathed, and Jono cringed as her jowls wobbled. A double cheeseburger with super-sized cheesy fries coming right up, he said, and winked again before turning his back on his most loyal customer and shuddering. He scratched at his protruding belly and farted, a side effect of his business, he always said, and got busy with the order. He shifted from one foot to the other as he worked, his nose and left eye twitching as he did so. He shook his head to stop it, but it just seemed to make it worse. Leaving the burgers on the hot plate, he went to the far end of the van and flung open the door, taking a lungful of grease-free air for the first time that day. For the 1000th time, an image of the college brochure swam into his mind. Ever since he was a kid, he'd loved food, eating it, smelling it, and most of all, cooking it. He'd been told he had a talent, that he could turn the plainest lump of meat into a myriad of flavours, that he should become a chef. Ha! He snorted as he gazed up at the sinking sun. When it all came down to it, the money just wasn't there, or not anymore anyway. The problem Jono had was, as much as he'd wanted to be a fancy chef in a swanky restaurant, he'd also wanted to block out the rest of his life. His drunk father, his shrill, abusive mother, the shame of the squalor in which he lived. High school had given him this opportunity, or more precisely, a group of seniors at high school had. They'd offered him a friendship, and they'd offered him a way to escape from reality. That's how he'd ended up here, flipping burgers. It was all he could afford without letting go of the one thing that made him happy. At least he was still working with food. The smell of burning brought him back to the present, and he balled his fist and then opened his hand again. It still shook. He needed to fix that. Jono went back inside and packaged up the order for Beth, plastered his best smile on his face, and turned towards her. He couldn't afford to lose customers. "Here you go, beautiful," he said, "just as you like 'em." "That's not all I like, Jono," she purred as she handed her money over, tickling his palm with her fingertips as she did so. Jono shuddered, but remembered to smile. "See you tomorrow," he said, and handed over her change. "Always," she said, and winked before she turned and waddled away. Jono rubbed his hands down his trousers as though cleansing himself. With no more customers in line, he decided to close a little early, a ripple of expectation making him smile at the thought of what was to come. He pulled open the cash drawer and smiled as he pulled out the notes and zipped them into a pouch he wore around his waist. He flipped off the grills and started cleaning up when a voice made him jump. "Sorry, mate, I'm closed," Jono said, and turned to find a rail-thin man in front of him, his filthy clothes hanging off him, a woolen hat more decoration than protection on his head. He had a rucksack slung over his shoulder, making him stoop to one side, and a roll of fabric under the other arm. "Sorry, got no leftovers," Jono said, and turned his back. I've got money," the man said, and then erupted into harsh, phlegmy coughs. Jono turned back just in time to see the man remove his hand from his mouth and wipe it on his jeans. "I've closed the grills down now, sorry." I've got money, please," the man said, and with his newly wiped hand he proffered an expanding £10 note, which he'd had clutched in his fist. Jono went to say no again when he heard the rumble of the man's stomach. "Okay, what do you want?" "Whatever I can get for this, please." Jono took the money off the counter and shoved it into his pocket before turning back and flipping the grills back on. "Oh, come on, man, it's only a tenner. I can give it you next time." "No way, man. You know the rules. Cash on pickup. No loans, no excuses," Andre said, and turned his back on the grease-smelling, swarthy man in front of him. "You know I'm good for it. I've never asked before, so cut me some slack, would you? Listen, Jono, we ain't at school no more. This is my business, man," Andre said, and held his arms out wide, his gold-adorned hands clasped around the object of Jono's desire. "Business that could disappear with one phone call," Jono snapped, perspiration peppering his skin now, his body craving what Andre was selling. "Ha! Like you dare." "I will," Jono said, and pulled his mobile phone out. "I suggest you think long and hard before you do that, my cold-turkeyed friend." The coldness in Andre's voice was not lost on Jono, but he was desperate. "Oh yeah? Why's that then? Who's going to supply you with your fix of snow?" "I can easily find." "Really? At the discount I give you?" "Ha! Call that a discount?" Jono snorted. "Besides, I don't think the others would be too happy that a brother had turned on us." "What do you mean by that?" "Turn on me, turn on all of us, bro. Turn on the pack, and the pack turn on you." Jono didn't reply. Instead, he thrust his shaking hands into his pockets, rocking from one foot to the other, sweat now dripping off his forehead. He needed his fix. Walking away without it was not an option. His left hand cramped, so he opened his fingers a little in his pocket, and they brushed against something smooth. He'd forgotten about his last customer. He pulled the £10 note out of his pocket and held it gingerly, remembering where it had come from. "Ha! I knew I had enough," he said, and thrust the money towards Andre. "Too late, mate. You've made your views very clear, and I don't do business with snitches." "Oh, come on, man. I was only joking." "Were you? Really? You're a junkie." "I am not a junkie." "Whatever, man, but we has a code you was only too happy to forget a minute ago." "I wouldn't have done nothing, you know that, bro." Andre stared at his friend, at his oldest customer. He shook his head. It wasn't supposed to have turned out like this. Jono should have been distributing like the rest of them. Should have been living in the lap of luxury with bitches eating out of his hand like the rest of them. Sure, they'd all enjoyed a snow day back in high school, but they'd had a plan that would have worked perfectly if Jono's mother hadn't gone batshit crazy, if she hadn't done what she'd done. Jono had needed the snow then, needed it to forget. Trouble was, he'd needed it too much, until it was too late. Andre shook his head as he looked at his friend. He should have stopped it back then, but he hadn't. Hadn't believed it would get this bad. He should help him now. But what? It might expose all of them. Andre hung his head and held the bag out to Jono, who was rocking from foot to foot, clearly agitated, clearly in withdrawal already. Here, man, Andre said. Jono snatched the bag out of his hand and Andre took the payment, the £10 note that had been Jono's salvation on the top. Andre split the money, placing most of it inside his rucksack. The rest, including the offending £10 note, he thrust into his pocket, awaiting payment for his own guilty pleasure. Juliet stared at her reflection in the mirror. She dabbed concealer around her right eye, trying to cover the bruise she'd sustained earlier. Her eyeshadow selection had disguised most of it, but still. Customers might like to damage the goods, but they didn't like to see damaged goods. She sighed as she looked down at her array of war paints, trying to decide how best to decorate her lips. Her gaze drifted to the pale pink baby doll outfit she had on, and she selected the clear gloss, transforming her lips into the shiny pout that he seemed to favour. Juliet dusted her cleavage with glittered body powder before she unclipped her thick, wavy, dark blonde hair and let it fall past her shoulders and down her back. Without looking in the mirror, she parted her hair and selected a baby pink ribbon and tied it around one section, securing it just below her left ear, allowing her hair to fall between her round breasts he'd insisted on, breasts he'd paid for. She repeated the action on the other side and sat back, turning her head from side to side. Hopefully, he wouldn't notice the bruise. He didn't like her being knocked about by anyone else. Juliet twisted round and slipped her ruby-tipped feet into a pair of strappy silver sandals. She surveyed the room then, to make sure everything was in place. The lamps on either side of the king-size bed were draped with ruby lace, casting the room in a soft glow which blended with the satin sheets he favoured. Her gaze moved to the bedside table where several condoms lay waiting, their use dependent on the pleasure he sought. Juliet took a deep breath and looked at the antique carriage clock her grandmother had given her. 2 minutes to go. He was never late. Flicking off the harsh light of her mirror, Juliet plucked a lollipop from the bowl on her dresser and unwrapped it. Placing it in her mouth, she uncurled herself and strode to the door and unlocked it. She then positioned herself on the bed, legs apart, knees bent, left elbow draped over her left knee, as her right hand held the lollipop, just so. The delicate lace of her baby doll top skimmed her thighs, leaving her crotchless panties to frame her. At 8 p.m, the door banged open, making Juliet jump. Dropping her chin to her chest, she looked up at him. Removing the lollipop from her mouth, she said, "Hey, baby, I've been waiting for you." Yeah, whatever. Never mix friendship with business, Juliet, ever, Andre said as he slammed the door and dropped his rucksack on an overstuffed armchair in the corner. He hadn't even looked at her, and Juliet flopped back on the bed, wriggling her feet out of the uncomfortable sandals, relief and dread suffusing her body. Relief that she wouldn't have to perform tonight, for him anyway. Dread, as she knew only too well what he would want, what he always wanted when he was slightly wound. "Come here, bitch," he said, snapping his fingers and indicating for her to come and kneel on the floor in front of the chair he'd slumped onto. She hated this more than anything, always had, but especially with him. Juliet dragged herself off the bed and sauntered over, dropping to her knees in front of him. She sucked on the lollipop, allowing her tongue to caress it as he watched her, and ran her free hand along his thigh to the bulge in the low-slung jeans, hoping she could divert him. Her heart sank as his hands fumbled with the belt, barely holding his jeans in place, and shoved them and his underwear down over his hips. Juliet recoiled at the odour, and Andre slapped her hard. "How fucking dare you? I own you, remember, bitch. Now blow me." Juliet cried out as he grabbed her hair and dragged her towards him, thrusting himself into her mouth so hard that she gagged, tears running from the corners of her eyes. She'd never understood why he said "blow me" when he was always the one in control. It wasn't about pleasure for him. She could be anyone. He just wanted a warm mouth around his unwashed cock. For him, it was about control. Control of her, to be more precise. He liked to remind her she was his and that he owned her. Tears flowing down her cheeks, Juliet allowed her mind to detach from the abuse her body was taking as Andre gripped her hair and yanked it back and forth at the pace he wanted. Not for the first time, she pictured clamping her teeth around his violating cock. But what then? She had no money of her own, had no place to go. Not yet, anyway. He made sure of that. Andre's grip released on her head, and Juliet braced herself, closing off the back of her throat and willing her gag reflex to stay calm as his hips bucked in release. He shoved her away from him, and then, as she scrambled to the bedside table, emptying the contents of her mouth into a tissue as discreetly as she could. Realising she hadn't put the bin back in place, she dropped the tissue on the bedside table before turning back to Andre, smiling. "Feel better, baby," she said, and went to sit on his knee, but he pushed her away. "What's with the outfit?" he snarled as he stood up and pulled his jeans back up, belting them just below the hips. "What do you mean? It's your favourite." "Last year, maybe, but it's a bit worn now, isn't it?" he said, and grabbing hold of one of the flimsy straps, he tore the pink lace away from her. Instinctively, Juliet covered her chest with her arms, regretting it immediately as a stinging blow struck her already damaged eye socket. He dragged his arms down and got hold of one of her exposed breasts and squeezed. Juliet cried out, and Andre shoved her backwards onto the bed. "Don't you dare cover yourself in front of me. I own those tits just like I own you. Now get yourself something new for next time and make sure I'm the only one who sees it." Andre reached into his pocket and pulled the wad of cash out, throwing it down on the bedside table before turning on his heel and leaving, slamming the door behind him. Juliet curled up on the satin sheets and wept, not caring that she was ruining her makeup, not caring that she needed to be at the club in an hour, not caring what he'd do if she didn't go, not for a few minutes anyway. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, Juliet hardened her heart once more. She pushed herself up and retrieved the money from the bedside table, wiping the £10 note at the bottom of on the satin sheets to remove the dampness from the tissue. She stood up and turned to her dressing table. Switching the mirror light on again, she inspected the damage Andre had inflicted and sighed. Maybe if she iced it, it would keep the swelling at bay for a while. Juliet removed a few £20 notes from the pile Andre had given her and flipped the mirror over, opening the false back and adding the notes to her growing stash. One day, she thought to herself. "What a day," Charles thought as he strode along the road, head down and the collar of his heavy wool coat turned up against the biting wind. Why had he agreed to the meeting so late? Now he would be late to the party, and he hated that, especially at those kinds of places. Lone men always seemed a bit dodgy. At least he'd won the new account, though. That should please the board and help secure the promotion he'd been working hard towards. That should also please Louisa. More money coming in might go some way to appeasing her for where he was going tonight. "It's not like it's my stag do, is it?" he tried to reason for the umpteenth time the previous night. "Well, you don't need to go then, do you?" she'd said, hands on her hips, her pretty mouth set in a grim line. "So if it was mine, I'd be allowed—" He braced himself then and regretted his taunt as a hardback book glanced off his temple. He knew how she felt about strip clubs, and for the most part he respected that. If he was totally honest, he wasn't a big fan himself, but Harry was his best mate ever since they were kids, so if Harry wanted his stag do in a strip club, then who was he to disagree? He just didn't know why it had to be a school night. The rain started then, and Charles quickened his pace, barrelling into one of the bouncers at kicks just as the heavens opened. "Oi, watch it," the man growled, and Charles looked up into the hooded eyes of the shaven-headed thug. "Apologies, bloody weather." The bouncer said before opening the door to the notorious club. Sounds, sights, smells and tastes assailed Charles all at once, and he recoiled, but found himself ushered inside by a boisterous gang of young men celebrating a 21st birthday. "Here he is! I told you my best man would never let me down." Charles squinted towards the bar where he saw Harry, tie already askew and garish lipstick adorning his face, a bottle of tequila on the bar in front of him. Charles groaned. Tequila was a bad sign. Tonight would get messy. "Only one thing for it then," he muttered as he rolled his shoulders back and approached the bar. "How much catching up have I got to do?" he said as he grabbed the bottle and took a long gulp, wincing as it burned its way to his stomach. He took the proffered lime from Harry. "Salt, then tequila, then lime," Harry instructed, slapping Charles on the back and laughing. "Okay, boys, I'll bring you drinks over. The show's about to start," a leggy blonde with downcast eyes said to them, guiding them over to front row seats. Charles watched her as she busied herself settling Harry's raucous friends, teasing and flirting as was her job, but tensing every time one of them got too close. "I wonder what our story is," Charles thought, as the house lights went down and the hypnotic beat of African drums started up. Charles soon forgot about the blonde as the stage lights came on, revealing a harem of scantily clad ladies whose sole purpose was to arouse their audience. Charles allowed himself to relax and left all thoughts of Louisa behind as he joined in with the caveman ritual that was men faced with strippers. He whistled and he called, he clapped and he shouted, he even relinquished his hard-earned money for the chance of a close encounter. He'd never allowed himself to relax in a place like this before, and for the life of him, he didn't know why. Louisa would kill him if she could see him now, but Charles didn't care. He didn't know if it was the tequila, hanging out with Harry again for the first time in forever, or even both. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt the weight of responsibility being lifted. He felt free, and he loved it and wanted more. As the show ended and the girls left the stage amidst whooping and shouting, Harry wobbled over to him and bent down. "Time for the highlight of the night, my friend," he said, causing Charles to turn away from the fumes. "Geez, how much have you had to drink, mate?" Charlie asked, thrusting an arm out to steady his friend. "Not enough, not nearly enough. Now, I hope you saved some money because it's time for some private dances." "Oh, no. Louisa will kill me." "Oh, and Karen won't kill me. Don't you worry, Charlie boy. Neither Louisa nor Karen will find out. Why? Because what goes on tour stays on tour." Charles finished and laughed. "Okay, then. Who've we got?" he said, as feelings of both excitement and apprehension raced through his body. "Whoever you want, Charlie boy. They're all up for grabs." Charles looked around and his gaze settled on the blonde who'd seated them. He wanted to know her story, he decided. Maybe he could help her. Charles felt a flutter in his stomach as the tall blonde took his hand and led him towards a curtained-off area at the back of the club. He had never gone this far in a strip club, ever, and Louisa would slap him with divorce papers if she found out. He tried to reason with himself that she would understand if she knew the real reason he was standing in a moodily lit room with a semi-naked, extremely attractive woman, sultry music drifting down from the speakers set in the ceiling. But who was he kidding? "It's payment up front," the blonde said to him, as she turned and traced a manicured nail along his now stubbly jawline. Oh, right, yeah, sure," Charles mumbled, and rifled through his pockets. "Sorry, I didn't have the right money." He proffered the 20s to her, and she smiled but didn't look up at him. "That's okay. I'll be worth the tip. Look, I wish I could, but I need to get home." He cringed at how pathetic he sounded, but it was true. He couldn't believe how much money he'd ploughed into this place. Damn tequila, he thought, as he watched the blonde shake her head and run her hand down her toned stomach and into her tiny panties. Charles was about to ask for his change when she withdrew her hand and presented him with a £10 note. "Now, you'll have a little less explaining to do to the missus." She looked at him then, for the first time, and winked, and Charles could see the bruising around her eye that she tried hard to disguise. "What happened to your face?" he asked, and reached out to her, but she recoiled from him and turned away. "Make yourself comfortable on the sofa and relax," she purred, as she adjusted something in the wall and the music changed, prompting her to begin to sway her hips. "Now remember, no touching," she said, as she turned and gently pushed him down onto the sofa. "What's your name?" he asked, as she started to dance for him, her eyes focused above his head, her spirit elsewhere. He knew. "Star," she whispered, as she moved closer. "What's your real name?" "None of your business," she replied, never breaking her routine as she revealed to him the secrets that sent most men crazy. "I can help you, Star," Charles said, his gaze fixed on her face, her gaze so far away he wasn't sure he could reach her. "Help me with what?" She didn't look at him as she spoke, and released her expensive assets from their sequined cage. "Help you get away from the man who beats you and makes you do this, and probably worse." Charles watched as her smile stiffened at his words and a hardness flitted across her gaze before, almost as quickly, it was gone. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Charles knew he'd hit a nerve. "I'm a lawyer," he persisted. "I do pro bono work from time to time, so my help wouldn't cost anything. I could help you get away, start again somewhere new, do something you want to do." He watched her as tears rimmed her eyes and a sob caught in her throat, before she swallowed it back down and turned away from him, moving to the back of the room and adjusting the music once more. "That's all, I'm afraid," she said, brushing the back of her hand across her eyes and lowering her chin again. I hope you enjoyed it." She stood aside to indicate he should leave, and Charles stood and rummaged in his pocket before walking towards her. He hooked his index finger under her chin, forcing her to look at him. "I don't believe you, Star, but if you change your mind, call me. My number's on the card." She looked away from him and opened the door to the private room. As Charles left, she plucked the card out of his hand. Charles groaned and turned over, forgetting where he was until he hit the floor with a thud, prompting another groan. He rolled over and rubbed his arm to mitigate the throbbing and then open his eyes. Jeez, he muttered and shielded his retinas from the searing sunshine. What time did you roll in? Louisa's voice was edged with accusation as he pushed himself up, his date with tequila resounding in his temples. Not sure. It was late and I didn't want to wake you. Likely story, she snapped, and bent down and sniffed him. I bloody knew it. She stalked away, fists clenched, and Charles closed his eyes and leaned back against the sofa. He didn't need a fight now, he thought, as his head throbbed. Dad! Dad! Charles winced as his son's cry stabbed at his skull. Turn it down, Damo. Turn it down, buddy. Have you got the money you owe me? I need it. I'll get it later. But I need it now. Why? You're going to school. I know, but I'm going out with Jonah after. His mum's dropping us at the store. The new game's out, and I need the money to get the game. I haven't got it, buddy. I'm sorry, Charles said, patting his pockets to emphasise the fact when he heard a paper-like sound. He reached into the pocket and withdrew the £10 note Star had given him the night before. Charles held it up, his mind attempting to recreate the events of the previous night after he'd left the private room, but to no avail. How had he got home? Woohoo! Damien whooped, making Charles wince. Thanks, Dad, he said, snatching the money out of Charles's hand and kissing it before racing from the room. And that's all I have time for, Macanori. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope it unsettled you if you paid enough attention to realise what could be on that £10 note that little boy's just kissed. And I'll see you next week. Bye.